My son-in-law slapped my daughter at their housewarming in front of 40 people. Open hand, across the face, hard enough that she went down onto one knee against the kitchen island. A wine glass went over. Somebody's little boy started crying by the sliding door. And in the silence after it, and there is a particular silence after a thing like that, I had never heard it before and I hear it every night now. My son-in-law shrugged. Actually shrugged, one shoulder, the way a man does when you ask him about the weather. "She embarrassed me," he said, and his father laughed. I want you to understand that the laugh was not nervous. It was not a man covering for his son. Dutch Threlkeld stood in that new kitchen with a glass of bourbon in his hand, and he laughed the way you laugh at a joke you've heard before and still enjoy. And he looked around the room to see who'd laugh with him, and he said, sometimes they need it. Sometimes they need it. 63 years old, and never once in my life have I wanted to hurt a human being the way I wanted to hurt that man in that second. My hands did something without asking me. I felt my weight come forward onto the balls of my feet. And then I looked at my daughter. Thea was still down on one knee on that beautiful new tile she'd picked out. Her lip was split, and there was blood on her chin, and blood on the collar of the blouse she bought for this party, and she wasn't looking at her husband and she wasn't looking at his father. She was looking at me, and her eyes were begging me, not for help. That's the thing. If she'd been begging me for help, I'd have gone across that island. She was begging me for the opposite. She was looking at her father and she was saying, with everything she had, without moving her mouth, "Daddy, please, don't make it worse." So I stopped. God help me, I stopped. I stood in my daughter's new kitchen with her blood on the floor, and I did not say one word. I nodded at her. Just once. And I turned around and I walked out of that room, past the appetizers on the counter, down the hall, past the guest bathroom, and I stood by the coat closet in a house I had helped them pay the down payment on, and I took out my phone. And I dialed one number. It was in my wallet on a card that had gone soft at the corners, and I had carried it for 3 years and never used it, and I knew it by heart anyway, the way you know a thing you've promised yourself you'll never need. 20 minutes later, 3 black SUVs came up that street and stopped in front of the house, one behind the other, and did not park so much as arrive. Everybody went to the window, 40 people with plates in their hands. The doors opened, and when the first man stepped out, and he wasn't in a hurry, he took his time, he stood there and buttoned his jacket and looked at that house the way a man looks at a house he grew up in. Dutch Threlkeld dropped his drink. Just opened his hand. The glass went off the granite and it broke, and the bourbon went everywhere, and he didn't look at it. He didn't even look down. He said one word. I was 6 feet from him. I heard it. He said, "No. I'm going to stop right here because I know how this looks and I want to be honest with you before we go 1 inch further. You think I'm about to tell you I have money, or that I know people, that I made one call and something dangerous showed up to teach a man a lesson. No, nothing like that. I'm a retired county land surveyor. I measure dirt for a living, or I did for 41 years. I have never in my life been in a fight. There is nobody in this world who owes me a favor. The man who got out of that first SUV had never met me. We had spoken exactly once, for 11 minutes, 3 years earlier, in the parking lot of a hardware store. And he did not come for me. He came because a thing that started 35 years before I ever heard the name Threlkeld had finally been done in front of enough witnesses. So before we go on, and I only ask this once, if there is a woman in your life whose husband makes her check his face before she speaks, hit subscribe. Not for me. Do it because somebody is going to scroll past this at 2 in the morning with a bag of ice against her mouth. And I want a stranger's story sitting there waiting for her. Mine wasn't there when my daughter needed it. Let this one be there for the next one. All right, my name is Cyrus Hedlund. I'm 63. My wife, Bernice, died in 2020, and I have not gotten used to it and I don't intend to. We had one daughter, Thea, she's 29. I want to tell you who my daughter was before, because people watching this are going to want to know how a smart woman ends up on a kitchen floor, and the answer is going to make some of you angry, and it should. Thea was the loudest child in any room she ever entered. She argued with me about everything. When she was 11, she wrote a letter to the county commissioner about a bike path. She played first base and she talked trash. She went to Bowling Green and studied accounting, and she once made a grown man cry in a meeting. And she told me about it laughing. Nobody hits that girl. That's what everyone thinks. That's what I thought. Here is what I have learned, and I learned it too late, and I'd like you to learn it now. It never starts with a hand. Not one time in the history of the world has it started with a hand. It starts with a look across a table when she talks too long. It starts with him being wonderful, genuinely wonderful, for 11 days and then cold for one, and her spending that one day going back over everything she said. It starts with her getting quieter in restaurants. It starts with her checking his face before she answers a question that was asked of her. By the time a hand comes out, that woman has been trained for years, and the training is that whatever just happened, she caused it, and the only way to stop the next one is to be better. My daughter was not weak. She was the strongest person I ever raised. She was simply worked on patiently by a man who had watched his own father do it since he was old enough to see over the table. Corbin Threlkeld was 31 at that housewarming. He sold commercial insurance. He was very good-looking in a way I have come to distrust, that scrubbed, agreeable way where nothing is ever out of place, not one thing, not ever. When Thea brought him home in 2021, he shook my hand with both of his. He asked me about surveying, and then he asked a second question, a real one, about how you correct for the curvature of the earth over long baselines, and I remember standing in my own kitchen thinking, this fellow listens. Bernice was already gone by then. I had nobody to check my read against. I've thought about that. He was good to Thea for about 18 months. I believe that. I don't think it was an act at the beginning. I think he was a man who had been shown one way to hold a woman, and was, for a while, honestly trying to do something else, and could not sustain it, because you cannot sustain a thing you have never once seen done. Now, let me tell you about his father, Roderick Threlkeld. Everybody called him Dutch. 68 now. He had a heating and cooling company with his name on 11 vans, and in that county that made him a man, people were careful around. Dutch was loud, he was funny, and he always bought the first round. And there was something underneath him that I could feel from the very first time I shook his hand and could not have described to you if you'd paid me. Like a hum through the floor when there's a machine running 2 rooms away. He talked about his wife in the past tense. She wasn't dead, he'd say it at cookouts. Somebody would ask, and Dutch would spread his hands and smile and say, Verity ran off. 7 years ago, left a note. Some women just aren't built for the long haul. And everybody would go quiet for 1 second, and then somebody would change the subject. And I did too. Every time. I stood there with a beer in my hand and let a man say that about his wife. 4 separate times, over 3 years. He also had another son. I did not know that for a long time. It came up exactly once, at the rehearsal dinner, when a great-aunt said something about the older boy, and the whole table went flat, and Dutch said, "That one's dead to me," and picked up his fork. Corbin never talked about a brother, not once. My daughter married into that family and never learned she had a brother-in-law. So that's the house Corbin Threlkeld grew up in. A mother who ran off, a brother who was dead, and a father who bought the first round. One more thing about Dutch, and then I'll get to the parking lot. Thea and Corbin got engaged at a restaurant, and afterward there were about 9 of us at a long table, and my daughter was telling a story. She was good at it. She'd always been good at it. She'd get going and her hands would go and you'd forget your food. And Dutch Threlkeld, from the other end of the table, said, "Boy, she does like to talk." That's all. 6 words, warm, smiling, and everyone chuckled, including me, and I watched my daughter's story stop. Mid-sentence. She said something short and she picked up her fork and she did not tell another story that night. I saw that happen, in real time, at the engagement dinner. Here is what I thought, and it is the most ordinary and most damning thought a father can have. I thought, well, that's how his family is. Now. The wedding was in the spring of 2022, and 2 weeks before it, a man I had never seen before was leaning on the tailgate of my truck in the parking lot of the hardware store on Route 9. He was around 40, built like a man who does something physical for work. Jeans, plain jacket. He was not threatening. That's the strange part. He looked, if anything, tired. He said, "Mr. Hedlund? My name is Landon Brannock. I'm Corbin's brother." I said Corbin didn't have a brother, and he said, "I know, that's the family's position." He said it without any heat at all, the way you'd read a line off a form. He told me he'd taken his mother's name a long time ago. He told me he was a sergeant with the state police, and he showed me identification. And I looked at it and handed it back, and I remember my hands had gone cold in June. And then he said the thing I have thought about every single day since. He said, "My father put my mother in the hospital twice before I was 10. I ran off at 17. Corbin was 8. He stayed in that house another 11 years with the two of them, and he watched all of it, and nobody ever once told him it was wrong." I said, "Sergeant, what are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm not going to tell you not to let your daughter marry him. It's not my business, and she wouldn't listen, and neither would you. I've done this 100 times, and it's never worked once." And he took out a card, and he wrote a number on the back of it, and he held it out. He said, "I'm asking you to put this in your wallet. If it ever starts, and I hope to God I'm wrong, I have been wrong before, you don't call 911 first. You call me. A patrol officer will come out and take a report and be gone in 40 minutes, and she will be in that house with him tonight. And tonight is when it gets bad. I work a unit that does this and only this. We bring an advocate. We do a proper assessment. We get her out the same night, and we do it in a way that holds up. And you do one more thing, Mr. Hedlund, and this is the part nobody can do, so I need you to hear it." He looked at me. "When it happens, you will want to put your hands on him. Everything in you is going to say that's what a father does. Do not do it. If you swing, you are a man with an assault charge, and he is a victim, and she goes home with him tonight because now she has to take care of him. He'll have won. The worst thing you can do to your daughter is be brave in the wrong second." Then he said, 20 minutes. Wherever you are in this county, I'm 20 minutes. And he got in his truck and drove away, and I stood in that parking lot holding a business card with a phone number on the back of it, for a wedding that was in 14 days. I did not tell Thea. I did not tell anybody. I have gone around and around about that, and here is the honest reason, and it is not a good one, because if I told her, it would be real. I put that card in the fold of my wallet behind my library card, and I paid for a wedding. And I stood up in a church and gave my daughter's hand to Corbin Threlkeld, and I shook his father's hand at the reception, and Dutch Threlkeld pulled me in and said, "We got a good one, huh?" And I said we did. That card was in my back pocket while I said it. 3 years. That's how long I carried it. And in those 3 years I watched my daughter get quiet. I'm going to list these, and I want you to listen, because this is the whole reason I'm sitting here talking to a camera at my age. She stopped calling on Sunday mornings. She started calling on Wednesday afternoons from her car in the parking lot at work. She started saying "we" about opinions. We don't really like that place anymore. Thea had never said "we" about an opinion in her life. That girl had opinions the way other people have freckles. She sold her car. There was a reason. There is always a reason, and the reason is always sound. At Christmas in 2024, she laughed at something, and then she looked across the room at him, fast, to see how the laugh had gone over. My daughter. Checking. I saw it. I want to be very clear with all of you. I saw it, and I had a card in my wallet from a state trooper who had told me exactly what I was looking at, and here's what I did. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself Landon Brannock had a wound and was seeing his own family everywhere. I told myself that if I said something and I was wrong, I'd lose her. And underneath all of that was the real thing, the thing I've had to say out loud in a room with other men who have done what I did. I did not want it to be true, so I decided it wasn't. There is a moment. There is always one moment. And I had mine in June of last year on the phone. She said, "Dad, do you think I'm hard to be married to?" 28 years old. And I said something, I don't remember what. Something warm and useless. "Of course not, honey. He's lucky to have you." What I should have said was, "Thea, has he ever put his hands on you?" 11 words. I have said them out loud in an empty house probably 400 times since, to nobody, at 2 in the morning. Fathers, listen to me. If you take one thing from an old man, take this. You are not going to be told. She is never going to sit you down and tell you. She is going to ask you a strange, small question one day that doesn't fit the conversation, and it will be the door, and it will only be open for about 4 seconds. Walk through it. Ask her plain. Ask her the ugly words. If you're wrong, she'll be furious with you for a week and she'll love you for it in 10 years. I didn't ask. And 3 months later, I was standing in a hallway by a coat closet with blood on my daughter's chin. The housewarming was the 13th of September. Saturday. They'd bought a place out on Richmond Court, 4 bedrooms, and I'd given them $11,000 toward the down payment out of Bernice's life insurance, and I have never once regretted that, because that money is what got my daughter a house that a judge could later order him out of. She was 14 weeks pregnant. She'd told me in August. She made me promise not to say anything until the party, and she was going to announce it that day with a little cake, and it was in the refrigerator, and it never came out of the refrigerator. I'll be careful now, because there are people watching this who have lived it, and I won't make theater out of it. Here is all I'll say about what happened. It was about the food, that's it. That's the entire thing. She'd ordered the wrong number of trays, or the right number, and somebody said it was the wrong number. And a man named Dutch Threlkeld made a joke about it at his son's expense in front of 40 people, and Corbin's face did something, and 11 minutes later my daughter said something small and ordinary in the kitchen and he hit her. She said, "Corbin, I've got it." 4 words. About a tray. Then the sound, which I will not describe, and my daughter going down onto her knee, and a glass going over, and a child crying by the door. Then the shrug. She embarrassed me. Then that man laughing and saying, "Sometimes they need it," and looking around the room to see who'd laugh with him. And I have to tell you something, and it's the worst part, and it's why I know that everything Landon Brannick told me in that parking lot was true. 2 people laughed, not loud, but 2 grown men in that kitchen made a sound, and then looked at their shoes. Because Dutch Threlkeld had said it, and Dutch Threlkeld had 11 vans, and there were men in that room who owed him money. That is the water those 2 boys grew up in. It isn't one monster. It's one monster and 40 people who look at their shoes. And then Thea looked at me. I need you to see her. She's on one knee. She's got her hand up by her mouth, not touching it. Just up, the way you hold a hand near a burn. She is pregnant, and nobody in the room knows but the 2 of us. And her eyes come up and find her father, and every single thing she is thinking is right there. If you go for him, this gets 10 times worse, and it doesn't get worse for you. It gets worse for me. Tonight, in this house, after everybody leaves. That's what her eyes said. And she was right. She had been living with him for 3 years, and I had not, and she knew exactly what the arithmetic was. The bravest thing I have ever done in 63 years of life was stand in that kitchen and do nothing. So I gave her that nod, and I want her to know, if she ever watches this, what was in it. It was not fine. It was, "I see you, I believe you. I am not going to make you pay for my dignity." Then I walked out. I went down that hallway, and I stood by the coat closet where her coats were hanging, her good wool coat, and I took out my wallet and my hands were not steady, and behind my library card was a business card with a phone number written on the back in blue ink, 3 years old, gone soft at the corners. He picked up on the second ring. He didn't say hello, he said, "Mr. Hedlund." And I found that I couldn't talk. Nothing came. I stood in that hallway making a sound like a man drowning in 6 inches of water, and Sergeant Landon Brannick said very quietly, "It's all right, just tell me where you are and tell me if she's bleeding." I said, "Richmond Court, 409, her lip." And then I said, "She's pregnant." There was 1 second of silence on that phone that I will hear until I die. Then he said, 20 minutes. I'm calling it in right now, and I'm calling my unit, and you need to hear me. Go back in that room. Don't say anything to him. Don't say anything to my father. Stand where she can see you and do not take your eyes off her. And if he moves toward her again, you get between them and you take it, but you do not swing. Can you do that?" I said yes. He said, "Mr. Hedlund, is my mother's name in that house?" I didn't understand the question. I said, "Dutch tells people she ran off." And Landon Brannick said, "She's in the car with me." I went back in that kitchen. 20 minutes is not a length of time, it's a country you get sent to. Somebody had given Thea a paper towel. She was standing now over by the sink, with her back half to the room, dabbing at her mouth and apologizing. That's what she was doing. My daughter was apologizing to her guests for the disruption, and people were leaving. Not all at once, in that awful staggered way, checking their watches, hugging her, saying we should get going, thank you, it's a beautiful house. 40 people had just watched a pregnant woman get knocked to the floor, and they were complimenting the backsplash. I have thought a great deal about those people. I've stopped hating them. Most of them will carry that afternoon for a long time. One of them, a woman named Sally who works with Thea, went and sat in her car and cried and then came back inside and stayed and stood next to my daughter and did not say anything and did not leave. She's the only one. Corbin had gone out to the deck. He was standing out there with a beer talking to 2 men about the gutters. He'd already put it away. That's what I want you to understand about him. 11 minutes after he split his wife's lip, he was discussing gutters, and he was not performing. He genuinely had moved on. The event was over because he had finished feeling the feeling, and Dutch Threlkeld was working the room, refilling glasses, telling a story about a job in Findlay, and every so often he'd look over at Thea by the sink with an expression of the mildest possible impatience, the way you'd look at a dog that had knocked something over and was taking too long to be sorry. At about the 17-minute mark, he came over and stood next to me. He said, "Don't make a thing out of it, Cy." I said nothing. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "They gotta learn. Verity never did. That's why she's gone." And he squeezed my shoulder twice, friendly, and he went to get the bourbon. At 19 minutes, a woman by the front window said, "Whose cars are those?" 3 black SUVs. Not police cruisers, no lights, nothing on the doors. They came up Ridgemont Court one behind the other, and they stopped in the street, and they were still for about 4 seconds, and every person left in that house was at a window. And the doors opened. I've told you what happened. The first man got out of the lead vehicle and he took his time. He stood in the street and he buttoned his jacket and he looked up at that house. A big house, new sod, 40-year mortgage, and he looked at it the way you look at a place you have seen before, in a different form, when you were small. Landon Brannock is 41 years old and he has his father's build and his mother's face. And Dutch Threlkeld dropped his drink. The glass broke and the bourbon went across that granite and down the cabinet, and he did not look at it. He said, "No." Just that. Quiet, to himself. Then the second SUV opened, and a woman got out of the passenger side. She was 67. She was wearing a green cardigan. She stood on the street and she straightened it, and then she started walking up the driveway of a house she'd never been to, toward the front door. I heard Dutch make a noise. I'd never heard a man make it before. It was not fear exactly. It was the noise of a man watching a thing come back that he had spent 7 years explaining away. And behind me, over by the sink, my daughter said, and she didn't know who any of these people were, she'd never seen a photograph, they had none. My daughter said, "Corbin, why does that woman look like you?" Let me tell you what those 3 vehicles actually were, because it's the least dramatic answer in the world, and it's the reason my daughter is alive and holding a baby this morning. Vehicle 1, Sergeant Landon Brannock and another trooper. Vehicle 2, a victim advocate named Salome Bird, who works for a nonprofit and is not law enforcement and carries a canvas bag with a clipboard and a phone charger and a stuffed rabbit in it. And Verity Brannock, who was not supposed to be there and who had refused, flatly, to be left behind. Vehicle 3, 2 more officers because in that state, when there is visible injury from an act of domestic violence, an arrest is not optional. It is not up to the victim, it is not up to her father. Somebody is going in the car. That's it. That's the whole cavalry. 2 troopers, 2 officers, a woman with a clipboard, and a 67-year-old grandmother in a cardigan. No one raised their voice. I want that on the record because I know what you were expecting, and I was expecting it too. They came in the front door. Landon didn't look at his father. Not once, and I watched for it. He went straight through that kitchen to my daughter at the sink, and he crouched down a little so he was looking up at her instead of down, and he said something quiet to her that I did not hear, and Thea started to cry for the first time since it happened. Salome Bird sat down on the floor next to her. On the floor, in that kitchen. And she started talking to Thea about nothing at all, in the calmest voice I've ever heard, and the two officers went out to the deck. Corbin didn't run. He put the beer down on the rail and he put his hands out in front of him, and here's the thing that told me everything about the house he grew up in. He wasn't surprised, not one bit. Some part of that man had been waiting his whole life for somebody to finally come, and Dutch Threlkeld came apart. He got loud. He told them this was a family matter. He told them his son was a homeowner and a taxpayer. He told them Thea had a mouth on her and always had. Nobody engaged with him. There is nothing on this earth that a man like that can less tolerate than not being engaged with. And then Verity walked into that kitchen. 35 years she was married to him. 7 years since she'd been in a room with him. She stopped about 8 feet away and she did not say one word to her husband. She looked past him, at my daughter on the floor with the advocate, and her whole face, I can't do it. I'm not a writer. It was a woman looking at a thing she had come a very long way to stop, and she said, "Sweetheart, I'm Corbin's mother. I'm not here for him, I'm here for you." And Dutch Threlkeld put his hand on his wife's arm. 68 years old, in a kitchen with 4 police officers in it, and he reached out and grabbed her by the arm and he pulled, hard enough that she came off balance, and he had his other hand up. He couldn't not do it. That is the whole of that man, in one motion. He could not stand in a room where a woman was speaking and not put a hand on her, even with 4 badges watching him do it. They had him on the floor in about a second and a half. And here's the part I'd want if I were you. As they were putting him down, Dutch Threlkeld looked across that kitchen floor at his older son, who was still crouched by my daughter, still not looking at him. And Dutch screamed his name. And Landon Brannock turned his head, slowly, the way he'd gotten out of the vehicle, and he looked at his father on the tile, and he said the only thing he said to him that entire night. He said, "Sometimes they need it." Then he turned back around, and he asked my daughter if she wanted to bring anything from upstairs. She didn't bring anything from upstairs. She said she'd get it later. She never went back into that house. We drove to my place at 9 o'clock at night in Salome Bird's car because Thea would not get in a police vehicle and nobody made her. And when we came in my front door, my daughter stopped in the hallway and looked at the coat hooks, the same hooks she'd used since she was 6, and she said, "Dad, I left the cake." That's what she said. Not one word about her lip. She'd made an announcement cake, a little one, chocolate, and it said baby on it, and it was in the refrigerator on Ridgemont Court, and she had never gotten to bring it out. And standing in my hallway at 9 at night, that was the thing that finally took her. I held my 29-year-old daughter in a hallway for a long time. That night, she slept in her old room with the door open, and I sat in the chair in the hall with the light on, 62 years old, and I did not sleep. And around 2 in the morning, she called out, not a scream, just, "Dad?" the way she used to when she was little and heard the furnace kick on. And I said, "I'm right here." And she said, "Okay," and went back to sleep. 9 words between us all night. 10 months later, she still sleeps with the light on somewhere in the house. She's not ashamed of it. Neither am I. Here's what came after. I'll go quick, because the kitchen is the story. Corbin was charged with domestic violence assault, and because Thea was pregnant, the charge was more serious than it would have been. He pled. He served time, and he's out now, and he is not permitted within 500 feet of my daughter or the baby, and he has not tried, and I don't know what to do with the fact that I'm not glad about that. He never once asked to see his mother. Dutch Threlkeld was charged that night for what he did to Verity in front of 4 officers, and for what he did to 2 of the officers who took him down. He went to trial because of course he did. 68 years old, and he could not conceive of a room that wouldn't eventually agree with him. 40 people were at that housewarming. 11 of them testified, including the 2 men who had laughed. He's in Marion. He'll be 71 when he gets out. His company is gone. The 11 vans got sold. There's a man in that county who bought 3 of them and painted over the name. Verity Brannock lives an hour from me now. She left her husband in 2018 at 59, and Landon drove her out of that house in the middle of a Tuesday, and she has spent the 7 years since being a woman that a man told an entire county had abandoned her children. She sat with my daughter every day for 3 weeks. She slept on my couch. She knew things nobody should know. She knew Thea would flinch at the sound of a chair leg, and she knew when to talk and when to just sit in the room, and she knew, on the fourth day, to say out loud, "You are going to want to go back, and it doesn't mean you're weak, it means you're a person." I asked Verity once, out on my back step, when the first time was. She thought about it for a while, then she said, "I was pregnant with Landon, 4 months. He didn't hit me. He put his hand around the back of my neck at a wedding, the way a man does when he's being affectionate, and he squeezed until I stopped talking. Nobody at that table saw it. It took 11 seconds, she said. I told myself that wasn't anything. And I was correct, technically. It wasn't anything, it was the whole thing. She looked out at my yard. She said, "Cyrus, the reason I stayed 35 years is that there was never one day where it was clear. There was always a reason, and he was always sorry, and I always could not point to the moment where an ordinary marriage had become the other thing. It's like asking a person to tell you the exact day they got old." She was right. Thea wanted to go back. On day 9, my daughter sat in my kitchen and said she thought maybe she'd made too much of it. And Verity said, "I know, I went back 4 times. And then she said, "Sweetheart, I stayed 35 years. Ask me if it got better." Thea did not go back. There's one more thing I have to tell you because it's the day I stopped being afraid for her. At the protection order hearing in October, Thea had to speak. She'd been dreading it for 3 weeks. She hadn't slept. She was 5 months along by then, and she sat in my truck in that parking garage for 11 minutes and said she couldn't. And then she went in and she did it. She stood up in a courtroom, 29 years old, in front of a judge and a bailiff and the man who'd hit her, and she described that kitchen. Her voice went twice. She did not stop either time. And when the lawyer asked her whether she had anything else she wished the court to know, my daughter said this. I've got it written down because I couldn't trust myself to remember it right. She said, "Your Honor, when he did it, his father laughed and said sometimes we need it. And I wanted in the record that his father said it out loud, in front of 40 people, because that's who taught him. I'm not just here about my husband, I'm here about a sentence." And she sat down. That was the loud girl. She was in there the whole time. The baby came in March, a girl. 7 pounds, 1 ounce, and she's 4 months old, and she is sitting in a bouncer 11 feet from where I'm sitting right now. Her name is Bernice, after my wife. Thea calls her Bird, and Verity Brannick is her godmother, and holds her every Sunday, and when Bird cries and Verity picks her up and puts her mouth against the top of her head, that's her grandson's daughter she's holding. She lost both her boys to that man. One ran and one stayed, and she lost them both. She got a Sunday, that's what she got. One of the 2 men who laughed came to my house in November. He stood on my step with his hat in his hands, about 50, a contractor who'd done work for Dutch for 9 years. He said he wasn't going to ask me to forgive him. He said he'd already told the prosecutor everything, and he'd say it again in a courtroom, and he did. Then he said, "Mr. Hedlund, I've got 2 girls." And he stood there and could not get another word out, and I understood the whole of it, and I did not comfort him. I want to be honest about that. I let that man stand on my step and feel it. But I shook his hand before he left, because he came. 40 people were in that kitchen. 11 of them stood up in a courtroom, and one of them drove out to my house in November to say it to my face. And if I've learned anything in 10 months, it's that the entire world turns on whether an ordinary person is willing to be uncomfortable for about 90 seconds. Landon and I have coffee once a month. He is the loneliest man I have ever met, and he would not thank me for saying so. I asked him, one time, why he'd bothered. Why a state trooper drives across a county to lean on a stranger's tailgate 2 weeks before a wedding, and hand out a card that 99 times out of 100 goes in a drawer. And he said, because when I was 8 years old, my mother's father came to our house. He knew. He stood in our kitchen, and he told my mother to try harder. He stirred his coffee. He said, he wasn't a bad man, Mr. Hedlund. He just didn't know what he was allowed to do. Nobody had ever told him there was a phone number. Now, I'm going to say the hardest thing, and then I'll ask you something, and then I'll let you go. You'll want to hear that I saved my daughter. I did not. I stood in the kitchen and did nothing while she bled. I had a phone number in my wallet for 3 years, and a state trooper had told me to my face exactly what was coming, and I watched her get quiet for 3 years and I said nothing, because I did not want it to be true. What I did, the only thing I did, is that when the moment came, I did not do the thing that would have felt good. I didn't go across that island, and I want to tell you what I've come to understand about that because it took me 10 months and a lot of nights. Going across that island would have been for me. Every bit of it. It would have been my rage, my dignity, my 41 years of being her father, discharged in about 4 seconds. And I would have gone home feeling like a man, and Thea would have gone home with him. Her eyes were not asking me to be weak. Her eyes were asking me to be useful. And there is a difference, and almost no man I have ever met knows it. And I did not know it either. And the only reason I knew it in that kitchen is that a stranger in a parking lot had taken 11 minutes to explain it to me 3 years earlier. So, if you're a father, and this is happening in your family, hear me. Your anger is not a plan. It has never once been a plan. Find out what agency in your county does this, not the police department, the unit, the advocates, the shelter, the hotline. Find out tonight when nothing is wrong. Put the number in your wallet. Tell your daughter you have it and that it isn't a judgment, it's a door, and it will still be there in 5 years. And when you are standing in that kitchen and your hands come up on their own, look at her face. She's telling you what she needs. It is almost never what you want to do. And one more thing, for the 2 men who laughed and looked at their shoes. There is no such thing as a bystander in a room like that. Dutch Threlkeld did not build himself. He was built over 40 years by every man who heard him say a thing like that and decided it wasn't his business, and I was one of them. 4 separate times I stood there and let that man tell a story about how his wife ran off, and every time I said nothing, I was pouring the foundation my own daughter would stand on. He said it in front of his sons for 30 years, and one of them ran, and one of them believed him. So here's my question, and I read all of them. My daughter reads them with me on Sundays, with Bird asleep on her. Is there someone in your family right now who has gotten quiet? Not hurt, not bruised, just quiet. Someone who used to argue and doesn't. Someone who checks a face before she answers. Somebody watching this knows exactly who I'm describing, and has known for about a year and has told herself she's imagining it. Say her name in the comments, not to me, to yourself. Then go get the number. And if this reached you, subscribe. Because I meant what I said at the start, and I'll say it once more, and then I'm done. There was no story like this waiting for me when I needed one. There is now. Let it find the next father with a card in his wallet who's telling himself he's being dramatic. I have carried one sentence for 10 months. I'll carry it to the ground. Sometimes they need it. Nobody needs it. Nobody has ever needed it. Not once in the whole history of this world has anybody needed it.